Hello.
Hey, Brendan.
I got a
Both the Brendans.
I
I was
got
about to say, hey, Brandon.
Hey Brandon. I got to step up for 5 minutes, but I started the recording. I'll be right back.
How's everyone?
Doing okay.
All right. Busy, but beyond that.
I wonder if I should be turning on video since we're live streaming.
You can be a superstar.
I don't know if I want that kind of burden. I missed last week's meeting. What did y'all talk about?
We went over the doc a bit more. I believe there was also a few other folks couldn't make it, but we went over the doc a bit more on the supply chain policy.
I see a doodle poll for something.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't remember what we were doing for that one.
I know you sent it out, but I don't remember what the result of it was. I don't think there was a result on that one.
This looks like a good outline to me.
While we're waiting for Brendan to get back, why don't we also, for anybody who hasn't put stuff into the attendance, hey Jack.
Hello. If you could post the attendance doc, that would be super useful. I don't see it in the calendar
Oh.
invite.
I just posted it in the in the Zoom chat as well.
Ah, sweet. Thank you.
We're just all going to post it a bunch of times.
Yeah, I guess we could probably get into it. So just as a reminder, this meeting's being live streamed to YouTube, and your attendance in this meeting, it's an agreement to abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct. Okay, so a couple of follow-ups from last week. The TAC elections, the TAC elections for in toto, I should say, or in toto TAC elections finished. There's a bunch of folks on the initial in toto sort of TAC steering committee, whatever you want to call it. Trying to remember who it is, who's on it. I believe it's like Aditya and some other folks, and Cole and Justin Kapos and some other people on there. I don't have the list off the top of my head. So that was last week. Also, as a reminder, we're coming up to KubeCon Europe. For folks who are going, I believe as part of the sort of unconference and some of the things that we're doing in sort of the security village out there is going to be supply chain security focused, and we're hoping to kind of get folks using some of the best practices and some of the other things that we've already been doing. And was there anything else that was a follow-up? No. Brendan, do you want to take the SBOM distribution thing?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we had a call with another cloud vendor today. I think we had a discussion around like S1 distributions. I know there's an IETF standard that is being finalized around doing this for like more hardware devices. So I think the idea is that they're standardizing, where the metadata is. So if you go, like all devices have a file system, they're like, oh, you go / SBOM, SBOM's gonna be there. I think the question around what we were discussing was how do we do this for cloud? And we talked a little bit about OCI and how OCI has some mechanics to that. But I think also more broadly around other cloud products that aren't necessarily OCI artifacts, like how do you want to do it? And I guess the question that I kind of want to propose is general comments on this, but also is there appetite for us to kind of look at this in a public forum with the cloud vendors?
So one of the things that I know has also been discussed is how do we not just do this for let's say cloud vendors to talk about, let's say, hey, we're S3 or something like that, and saying, hey, S3, this is the SBOM for S3 or something. But I think one of the things that's still also an open question is how do we distribute SBOMs for just packages? There's really not a standard for like, hey, I download something from Maven and this is where it should live. There's work on some of that, but one of the things that a lot of folks had brought up, and this is also the same thing with Salsa, is folks are asking for a more generalized specification for metadata that they can, metadata about a package. And so that, because I know one of the big things that people don't want is they don't want to have to say, hey, great, I don't want to download the package, I just want to download the SBOM, and you're telling me I need to implement a different, I have to utilize a different API for Ruby gems versus, NPM versus whatever. along with that, I think, there's obviously also a bunch of practical constraints. Like one of the big things that was discussed was, well, there's two practical things. One is nobody wants to work, largely everybody's like, hey, I don't want to necessarily change what I'm already doing. And implementing something is potentially complicated regardless, especially when you go to some of these big package managers like Gems or whatever. The other thing was some practical elements around, like, it needs to be CDN friendly. So, when looking at APIs and some of these other things, like, the less that is, hey, there is like some sort of search function, the less that's that, and more that, no, the expectation is just that there is something static here at this endpoint, would be very useful there. But it's also something that's been brought up to, also on the OpenSSF and some of the other things. So I think there definitely is an appetite for it. I think the thing is it's a much broader thing than just the cloud stuff. That's just my 2 cents.
Brandon?
Yeah, and I know we've dug into this a few times in the past, and I don't know if there's a good way to make a generic solution to this. As much as we want to have this generic solution that's just going to work everywhere, trying to implement something that's going to work in NPM, pip, Debian packages, Git releases, there's a million ways we're distributing this stuff out there, and each one's going to have very different ways that they want to attach metadata to their solution out there. And I just don't have a good answer for you other than saying pick each individual area and work with those individual areas on how they want to do it. But I would kind of go probably along the same lines that Michael was going there, of saying instead of solving it just for SBOMs, solve it generically for whatever the metadata is you're attaching. So in addition to SBOMs, we're looking at attestations, we're looking at all kinds of signing and other kinds of metadata we want attached to it.
Yeah, and before Jack goes, maybe I want to kind of talk a bit about that. So yeah, I agree that, like, PyPI and like Ruby Gems and other repositories kind of have a different set of architectural needs. I think if we can have this just for like cloud products, for example, I think that would be like, I think things that don't are like kind of like services, that seems to be kind of what the focus area is. Like, oh, do you just have a button that you can click where like download SBOM on your dashboard page, or like is there a, like you said, a way that we can just go to, like, if it hits the API where we're on the page, we do just / metadata, and it gives us a list of files that we can download.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with Brandon and everyone else that it's probably impossible to get everyone to agree to one standard. Like, a lot of these registries are pretty much the same in that you have usually an organization and then a person or whatever, and they own a package, and when you ask for the package at this version, you get sent it, right? Like, that's a common thing across them all, but there's no standard API for any of that. And if they can't agree to that to start with, then we probably won't get a common API for SBOMs as well. Yeah, I mean, the only things that come to mind are maybe we could suggest like a REST API type of structure that they would then implement for requesting these SBOMs, or maybe there could be a project that that adapts based on which ecosystem you're looking at, and you run this as kind of a middleware type gateway API almost, where you just hit this API in the same way pretty much for anything. And it goes and works out what the hell it needs to do for an NPM artifact or a Maven artifact or whatever. But yeah.
So I have seen situations where the folks have agreed that, you know, there's no like one-stop solution for something, and then someone decides, oh, I'm actually going to go ahead and create it because I think I think there's a need. I know that there's like a company that has a registry for SBOMs in particular. I don't know if anyone's using it, but maybe they're using it. What does this group think about instead of talking about like what the specification is, maybe come up with some kind of workflow for SBOMs, like how you would actually use it when you're developing. The term I'm throwing around is I call this bomb ops. I mean, so you know, basically integrating SBOMs into the SDLC.
I totally agree. The workflow is so much more helpful and useful for those who are at the, implementing that in the enterprises. Because in enterprises, there's never one team. There are always 7 or 8 different teams who are responsible for different things, and there are always competing territories. So I think a clarification in the form of a workflow would go a long way in promoting that.
So I agree that would be very useful. I think there's we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem with some of the existing stuff with SBOMs today, right? Which is like by and large SBOMs are not being generated correctly and are not very good, which then leads to folks going and saying, hey, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this data, and then that kind of leads to further stuff down the line. But I also think that like we could probably do both, not necessarily, everybody has too much stuff on their plate, but I just mean like we still have the problem of how do we distribute SBOMs. I think that still doesn't go away. Though I do agree that we should have also, this group could potentially have guidance around stuff like, hey, you have, you're looking at, some cloud provider and they provided you with this SBOM, like what sorts of things should you be looking for in there to be, to use that as part, to address policy and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think we're having this conversation now between cloud providers. I think the hope is that at least so right now we're talking to AWS. We also are talking to Azure as well. I think the hope is I think once the conversation start going somewhere that we could kind of use this neutral space to discuss some of that. So I think we had the folks that are interested, and that could lead to some interesting discussions as well.
Can you give more context on what the cloud providers are trying to solve there? What exactly are they looking for the customer workloads? Are they looking to exchange metadata about the cloud services themselves?
There, a lot of the discussions are around what things need SBOMs that they want to have publicly available, how the SBOMs should be created and what the scope of the SBOM should be for products. And then lastly is how do you then make the SBOMs available to the customer? I think those are kind of the 3 main questions. Yeah, because I think there was we had like some conversation around like, oh yeah, if you have a managed service, do you want an SBOM or like, you know, or not? If you have like also like the scope of SBOM of a SaaS, for example, that's not really quite defined yet, and there's like a lot of things that don't necessarily make sense. That even if you had the SBOM, you could do anything, have any action on that. So yeah, I think those are kind of some of the questions that we talked about.
So I have actually a few things in that vein. It seems to me that we're talking about two things. Or we're talking past each other and we're talking about two things. One is like an internal SBOM workflow, and the other one is publishing infrastructure for SBOMs. And maybe a third one, which is what does an SBOM look like for cloud providers? The last one, there are conversations happening under the CISA umbrella. This is something that I'm involved in, and I see a lot of I see representatives from AWS there, not necessarily from Azure. So I'm interested to know whether anything from those conversations have come up in yours, Brandon.
Yeah, so more specifically, you know, I believe like Mike Thompson is the one that's part of the meetings, and then we are aware of like the CISA meetings. I think we are more kind of, I think the CISA cloud meetings are kind of looking more towards like, oh, you know, this is kind of where it's going. There's a lot of unsolved problems around where this should go. I think our discussion is around like where we are right now, and like with more within like the next 3 to 6 months, rather than like, oh, this is what the ideal situation should be. I think the question that we are kind of tackling is, if we want to provide value to customers today from a cloud product, what is the best way to do this, and can we do it in a coordinated fashion that doesn't confuse customers?
Yeah. So yes, Mike has been very vocal in those conversations about specifically like what does as an example, what does an SBOM for S3 look like? Honestly, the SBOM for S3 is just S3. You could very well just say like, we have S3, it's a service, and it's a standalone service that can be called using this API. There's already functionality for that. Cyclone DX has a thing called SaaSBOM, so you can list out services as well as software components. Mike can easily use that.
Yeah, we're kind of straying away from the SaaSBOMs for now. I think it sounds like there's quite a bit of work that still needs to go into that. So at least, you know, for the immediate future, it's kind of like, what can I give? Maybe, you know, here's the bundle that I'm running on the top level, or in the managed service. You know, this is basically, if it's a SQL server, then here's like MySQL, or PostgreSQL. Like, here's the version of PostgreSQL or MySQL that's being run, and kind of just scoping it that way, not necessarily as like a SaaSBOM, as in like, this is exactly what it's running, rather than like, here's and basically for this particular product, this is the software that we're using to run it.
Yeah, and I know this is from, I think, I want to say a couple of years ago at this point, but yeah, like I think the thing, you know, this is something that should be interesting when we talk to some of the cloud providers. In one of the former CISA meetings, this is like a couple of years ago, about SBOMs, they seem to be very, very adamant against offering SBOMs because they felt that it was getting into their intellectual property. And like, you know, hey, if I tell you that I built this using, Postgres version X, I don't want to tell people that we use, for our public service, we use this, that, or the other thing. So that's going to be an interesting thing there. And yeah, I think, to Brendan's point, I think one of the things that a lot of folks are starting to ask for is more of that, like, if I pull in, I don't know, some random, tool from the internet, and I look at its SBOM, I know it consists of this library, that library, et cetera. But when I look at the same thing, when I use S3, if it turns out, as an example, S3 is using a compromised version of Log4j, I'd want to know that as an end user, or at least have some sort of, certification from them that they're not vulnerable to it or something like that.
Real quick before Jack speaks, yes, I agree to both. The first one I think is easily answerable because this is like on the client side. But the latter one, which is like whether I'm affected by Log4j because I'm using your service, is a much more difficult question. And I think we've decided that we're not going to answer that right now. It still needs a lot more discussion. But yes, both are valid.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation around is more like those like managed services. Where it's like, oh yeah, we're just helping you deploy something that's open source. It's like how we actually built it and the versions that we're using.
Go ahead, Jack.
I do want to make sure that we also have time to go spend a bit of time for the document that we're having. So maybe within the next 10 minutes, we can kind of wrap the discussion up, and then we can continue next week as well.
So I'd say personally, having an SBOM that just says I am S3 or I am whatever service, and then has no other details, is not particularly useful to me. If you did need all of your, like, if you wanted to track the usage of this tool in your architecture, and you wanted everything that you depend on to have an SBOM, then maybe you would want an SBOM, but I wouldn't necessarily just have one that says I am a service. Maybe one that says I have no idea what this thing is would be more appropriate. I'm just thinking, if you could just submit an SBOM saying I am a thing and give no more details, then people will be like, oh, we supply SBOMs, when they're just supplying 5 lines of JSON or something. And, maybe higher ups in your organization who are less technical go, well, I see you have SBOMs for everything, so we know exactly what software dependencies are used in everything we depend on, right? And everything looks good. When maybe it's best to just have a generic SBOM that says I have no idea what this thing is, but maybe that's fine because we trust AWS or Google or whatever organization it is, and that can help you understand where your trust boundaries are, like where you need to trust things. But yeah, I don't really want to ship an SBOM saying here's the SBOM for Zoom. It has unknown dependencies, have fun type of thing, because at that point I wouldn't personally call it an SBOM.
For sure.
So I think when you're talking about, well, there's a lot of ideas that came to mind. So the first one is historically, and this also supports what Michael was mentioning before. The cloud vendors were the loudest in voicing that they did not want to produce SBOMs for their services. Not only about IP issues, but also that by having to produce SBOMs, it would also kill their agility and remove their ability to redeploy things on demand. And at least that's what the argument was. I've not seen anything that's changed there. Not to say that there's no support for SBOMs in these organizations, but for the things they actually manage, I've not seen any signals that say they want to show what they're running internally. But also when it comes to SBOM itself, so we're talking about S3, but what does that, if you're asking, well, what does S3 have inside of it? Like, there's, unless we definitely get some form of visibility into that, it's pretty hard. Of course, it's pretty hard to link. But some of the questions, some of the comments seem to come from the other side, which is like, I'm building a piece of software that uses S3. But when you're doing this at build time, what does that even mean to point to that as an SBOM? Because at the end of the day, I might be using a library to connect that speaks the API, but I don't really see it as any different than saying this thing connects to an HTTP REST point that conforms to a specific API. What is actually implementing that API? You have no idea what it is. Like, it could be S3 itself, it could be R2 from Cloudflare, it could be an on-premise thing with Ceph or similar. And so a meaningful line within an SBOM that I build would have almost no meaning because of that. The decision on where it goes and how it's configured is dynamic, though you can actually look at what the client library is that you use. So I just want to toss some ideas around that.
So one thing that comes to mind on the agility point is I don't buy it. I think that these cloud vendors do a lot of stuff. They do a lot of automation. I think that they can automate generating SBOM if everyone else can. If they can automate spinning up thousands and thousands and thousands of VMs per day, they can make some files. I think that the worry is people could see how maybe not agile they are, because you could see, wait a minute, this SBOM hasn't changed in the past 7 months. Maybe they're not actually being agile at all. And I'd say...
I want to be clear, I agree with you. It was just from the signals I saw from them back when we got the initial SBOM public responses that were put out back when NTIA was pushing the whole SBOM charge in the US government, because they were asking about whether they should be required to do so from a regulatory perspective. Though I fully agree with everything you're saying. Like, that should be something that's easily automatable.
Mm-hmm. And then just the thing about services in general. So if we think about a completely either open source or a system that you have full awareness of, if you have, say, your architecture diagram or your network connectivity diagram, you'll have services that connect to each other. You'll know that these services are linked to these artifacts, these binaries or whatever bundles of interpreted code you have, but you have your, I guess, server in this case, and if you have full control of that, you could go, well, this artifact that provides this service here is I don't know, got some log4j stuff, and then this one over here has some other problem. So I think it's worth knowing this service has these dependencies.
Right.
It's a lot easier to do when you own it all, but yeah.
The problem we're going to run into, though, when it comes to the dynamic linking portions, is that SBOMs are static content that are sent out at build time. And so to say I'm linking to S3, and this was the S3 SBOM at the time, is not going to be particularly meaningful, especially since the implementation itself can change. So there has to be some additional thing besides SBOM that gets layered on top that says, like, here's my dynamic system, and I'm linking to the SBOMs of where they were when they were built. Another really good example is things like of other dynamic information are things like CVEs. Like when you produce an SBOM, if you include the CVEs, that list is almost certainly going to change for any major piece of software. So it's better to say, here's the SBOM that identifies what it is, and then use that as a key to go to a system that's dynamic, that can provide you with actual information rather than stale information. And while it is tempting to say, here's the current state of the system with SBOMs, saying like these are the CVEs that were there, the danger that we run into is that we encourage people to look at that as a source of truth, rather than go to systems that are live or they're going to be less error prone. So there's we see similar issues in other environments, like the number of people who, when they're validating a JWT token, will just lift the certificate straight off the JWT itself and then validate the certificate is very high, because people make mistakes as they're doing the implementation, and they're not thinking of this type of things. So we want to make sure that the techniques are done in such a way that it's mechanically difficult or impossible to do something that's going to make them insecure. Going back to the main point, it's static versus dynamic.
I feel like that could be solved with just versioning. And so version the SAS resource and say we're releasing EC2 version 1.3.7. And then the SBOM is attached to that.
Yeah, they could have a version endpoint that you hit to work out what number it is, or commit hash, or whatever they want to pick. I'm not super convinced that absolutely every single thing needs to be static. I do love my static dependencies, but yeah, if you've got networking, then as long as it implements the interface that you want, it doesn't really matter what version it is. So, as long as you can go, at this current time, I'm going to do some analysis, or, oh, I've seen something has changed, I'm going to do some analysis. I don't see any issue with having something be a bit more dynamic.
So I want to mention a few things before we continue the discussion. I think one, I don't think we should make assumptions of what cloud providers, at least within discussion, I don't think it's scope to say what the motivations of cloud providers are. I think that's not going to be very productive for the discussion if we have cloud providers in the room. Don't want it to be a pissing contest.
Well, definitely agree with that, but it is important to understand the stance that they do have, which historically has been very, we don't want to do it style.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, my personal experience with being part of the EO response is that the SBOM tooling is like, I think as Michael said before, not great. And so like we've had cases where I think it's difficult to be able to have a high certainty that if we try to automate something, that it will produce the right results that we can be held accountable to. For example, we've run certain SBOM tools that have said, cool, we scan everything, we catalog everything, and it's an empty SBOM, just like empty JSON file, because it errored out somewhere. And so like, I think there is like couple, and that's why I kind of want to make sure that we kind of separate the things that like the CISA Cloud Working Group is looking at, and then like what we want to look at, because they're definitely like the API stuff, that stuff. I think the CISA Working Group is talking a lot about that. I think with the current discussion, it's kind of more like within the next 3 months, what are we able to provide customers with that can be valuable and be used.
So a quick point of order question, Brandon. Is the objective for this group to create an executive summary about like software supply chain security in general, or is it
Well, not for this topic.
not for this topic? Okay, so this is like a sidebar.
So the wait, let me. I think we went like through a lot of tangents. So kind of like coming back to the initial ask is that we have multiple cloud providers that want to be able to provide SBOMs in some sense across cloud certain cloud products within the short term. We want to discuss whether CNCF is a good place to discuss this and whether we can have productive conversation around that topic to solve near-term SBOM value proposition.
Yeah, and to that, I think the CISA discussions are very valuable towards that, because it's not just addressing like front-facing APIs. It's also addressing how you organize the cloud stack and what gets visible to the customer based on what they're using. So there are actually 3 subgroups. One is the API part, and one is the cloud backend, and or service backend, and the third one is the application BOM. So I think that's a relevant place to get information from. If CNCF wants to start another spin up another discussion about this, that's fine. I'm just saying that you could use information from the CISA discussions.
Yeah, I don't disagree with using information from CISA discussions. I think we wanna, it's kind of more, do we wanna act as a neutral conversation space for 3 cloud vendors to talk and have that be public?
I mean, I represent a cloud vendor. I'd like that to happen.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't think it would be nice if we all went to the CISA group and be like, yeah, we just want to talk technical realities today. Doesn't seem like that is that level of granularity around like talking about infrastructure and like specific versions and like build pipelines and things like that. It doesn't seem to be of interest in that group, I believe, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, but speaking as a representative from a cloud provider, I understand where they're coming from. That's okay. But I also see from our customers that there is a need to provide greater visibility into services. I also hear that they don't need like full and complete visibility, just enough to just enough to help them manage their own risk. And that right now is through the shared responsibility model. And every cloud provider has a document on on their particular shared responsibility model, which says what the cloud provider is responsible for and what the customer is responsible for based on what service they're using. So there is some structure there. It's just that we have to figure out how to express that in a BOM of some sort.
Yeah, I don't think I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I think it's kind of just like my hope for this conversation is more just like is it going to be valuable? Which I think the answer seems to be yes. Right. So yeah, and in the process we talked about a lot of interesting topics, so I'm not complaining. Frederick, you still have a hand up.
Yeah, I should have put it down though. I do have some comments here which maybe I should use. I do actually. I'll hold them for now. I'll just put that down. Sorry.
Okay.
Was there a second item on the agenda you were trying to get to?
Yeah, it's don't really have time for that though. I think. Yeah, I guess the second item will be we added more content to the expectations versus reality document. We can go through some of this. Oh wait, no, this is not the right document. Sorry. Wait, did I link the right one? Yeah. So so I wasn't here last week. Did we go through the existing content that's in there yet?
It's been a long week. I honestly don't remember.
Okay.
I think what we did was we went through what was there and also added some new bullet points to the different sections.
Okay. So
I'm not sure if
maybe
anything new was added since then, though. Sorry. Yeah.
So did we get through everything? Well, I added some stuff last night. So how do I share my screen? There we go. All right. Did we get through everything last time, or was there stuff that we didn't get to?
I added some things, mostly comments though.
Okay. Well, I can't. How do I can't expand this big enough on my screen to show comments and still be able to do things. Well, I
Do we
added
need
a few
to-
things so we can. Sorry.
Do we need to do some homework before going deep into this?
Well, so we don't have that much time. So what I'm thinking is that I can just go like high level, go through the stuff that like whoever added things can like talk to it a little bit just for context. And then we can do our homework to all review the document and comment on it. I think that's what we can achieve in the next less than 10 minutes. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So assuming that we went through everything that's not new, and anyone that added information, feel free to unmute, and I can't see hands, so just unmute and talk. So in the securing over time, I added this point of vulnerability management, talking about like risk prioritization. It's just not just like about dependency patching. Sometimes dependency patching is not possible or it's very difficult, especially with I think we had a project. I can't remember. One of the CNCF projects came to us and be like, yeah, we're using this library that uses this other library that has a vulnerability, so they can't directly patch that vulnerability until the the dependency that's using it has patched it, so that doesn't become kind of like an immediate cause of action. So I added a point here on like risk prioritization, that there's more than one possible path to remediation, and you're developing a remediation plan. In securing over uncertainty, I added a point on uncertainty in metrics and security metadata, kind of a little bit what we talked about earlier, like we were saying that, you know, maybe an SBOM may not be kind of like a real SBOM and doesn't have the accurate or complete information. So this is something that we need to consider as well. And I added a resolution section under securing over uncertainty around like if we have indicators of measurement, practice good hygiene, benchmark scoring, things like that. Having a trust policy and who you trust to provide what information, and then being able to verify where the metadata comes from. Yeah, I think that's pretty much stuff I added. Any other things that we want to talk about? Oh, actually, one more thing here. I added a point on securing at scale around like ownership. Basically, you can't scale security with one security team.
So I believe the corporate term for this is asset management.
Which one?
In general, just like for each of the things that you've listed here, like risk analysis and good hygiene and audits and accounts of what we're using. I think the generic, like the corporate term for that is asset management. And I feel like one thing that is difficult for, well, I think we don't communicate this very often, which is that in cloud native, invariably 90% of the software that we're using is open source. So the percentage of proprietary assets that you want to keep track of is very small compared to your typical, like even in a typical product world, the asset, most of it is proprietary, but in this case, good, like the majority of it is in the public domain or under a public license. So the first part, I think, is to accurately determine how much of your assets actually belong to you. And this is, I think that this is an issue that even like vendors for vulnerability scanning don't quite understand. And as a result, they are unable to scale.
Would you be able to add a point, maybe, I think, under securing at scale about this? I think that's good to have.
Well, I think it's a general thing. I can add it like as a top level thing and then add some points for each section about that. So for example, this thing about known unknowns and unknown unknowns. In cloud native, the known unknowns like vastly outnumber the known knowns and the unknown unknowns. So the known unknowns is like, that you're pulling stuff off the internet, you don't know what it is. But it's a large piece of what you're shipping, and so it's difficult to get your head around it while you are developing software. So to ask developers to, give information that encompasses all of that stuff is very hard. That's the thing that's the part that you need to focus on if you're trying to manage all of your assets, is try to find some way to account for that 90% of software that's under a public license.
Can I put a comment here tagging you to maybe add a little bit more information?
Yeah. Sure.
What's your, oh no.
Nisha Kumar X. KUMARX.
Yeah, I have it up here. Right? Can I? Oh, yeah, I can't even.
Just my email is nishakumarx@gmail.com. That's the one that I use here. There we go.
Okay.
You can just assign that to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to also mention the concept of asset management and inventory management continues to be a huge problem for larger organizations. Like, a fun experiment to play with some of these groups is to have them pick a set of IP addresses that and have their security team tell you what is behind those IP addresses, what is it serving, and who owns those services, and see how far they can get with a sample. And I think in most larger organizations, except the most mature, in terms of automated processes, will have real difficulty telling you that.
Yeah, Frederick, maybe either if Nisha puts in the first draft, and then maybe we can add a few comments on top of that, or if you want to add in stuff as well, that'd be good.
Yeah, I'll wait for the first draft because I have to make sure KubeCon's doing its thing, so I'm hit for time right now. But I did want to bring that up. It's not the main reason for it is that this is actually, I see this actually has a critical place where there's multiple ways to build up the inventory, but this particular process is one of the key components towards building and maintaining that inventory in the long term. So which then says, how do we tie into the rest of the environment? So, like, how do I actually manage risk at scale? So you're on a really good track. This is what I'm trying to say.
Cool. We have 1 minute left. Okay, maybe we can bash out this one comment. Nisha, what do you mean here by nuance?
So when you say vulnerability scanning, usually executives will say, "Oh, there are a lot of vendors out there. Let's go shopping." This is one of those things where you really need to understand how vulnerability scanning works, and how the databases work, and how security researchers or folks that are looking for vulnerabilities in software look at it. And this is particularly the case for services, because there is no vulnerability database for services. And yet there are a lot of instances where services are actually vulnerable to an exploit. And it's quite easy to do. Yet there's no enumeration for it. There's not really a public database for all the exploits similar to like the
Well,
NVD, for example. So
yeah, so like I think that's like the KEV database also for like government related things. At least for the government things, it's important. We're at time, so I have to cut you off. Sorry, Nisha. I think this goes under kind of like maybe under this like uncertainty of matrix and security metadata. We can probably talk a little bit about that, right? Does it kind of like go into the category? All right. Anyway, I think we'll pick up the discussion again next week. We're already over time.
thank you.